We're back with Talking Metal Live, and in the studio we've got a very special guest, seated to my right. That's to your left if you're listening at home, Bobby Blitz.
Bobby, thanks very, very much for coming down. The Ironbound record is unbelievable. Both Mark and I ran out, bought our copies, and just are blown away by this record. I was listening to it all last weekend with Jay, and it's just an unbelievable record. My favorite song is The Goal Is Your Soul.
You know what's good about this record? Everybody has a different favorite song, which is making me think that there's 10 great cuts on there.
Yeah, that's the key. Because sometimes, there's one song that everyone likes and nobody talks about the other tunes.
Sure.
Seriously, I think the whole record's great, but that was the one that stuck out for me.
I got to Switzerland. We did a great venue called Z7 in Prattlin, which is right outside Basel, and there is a photographer that meets us there. He goes, "Blitz, finally, all killer, no filler."
I love it. There you go. I mean, cool. And it is a great record. The music video, I guess, first single, if you will, "Bring Me the Night," great track. My favorite, "Give a Little," though, just love it. It brings me back, especially the chorus, such an old school feel to it. Was there a conscious decision to kind of tap back into the old sounds? I mean, it still has sonically a very contemporary sound, but there are elements of this record that do maybe skew a little old school, if you will.
I think the old school vibe that's in there is those gang vocals that that we're all used to hearing when the fire was lit and the revolution started back in the 80s. But I think it's reinvented, and that's really the idea of it. There was no conscious vibe. The record formed on its own. I think that really the X factor for the record was, in March of 2009, it was Overkill Exodus for Europe. In April of 2009, we started assembling this. So, under the doorways and through the cracks in the studio walls snuck in the road chemistry as we were putting this together. And that's kind of an old school tour, Overkill Exodus. So when we started putting this thing together, next thing we knew, we had kind of an old school reinvented record. Right. So it's back then, but again, with a contemporary presentation.
Seems to me that there's such a kind of like old school vibe just going on in the state of metal nowadays. You were talking about the tour you did with Exodus, which was kind of like I'm sure you guys were on tour with Exodus back in the day. And do you feel that there's a resurgence of thrash and old school metal going on right now?
Yeah, I mean, without a doubt. And I have to attribute it to more so the younger bands than the old guard. I mean, the younger bands have created a new interest in this scene based on, their commitment, which is really a lot the same as when bands like Overkill Exodus had started, Death Angel, Testament, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, there's even social and political themes that reflect each other in
that are happening now.
That are happening now, that happened then, whether that be war, whether that be economics, et cetera, et cetera. And these are great reasons to start a revolution. And, I always think of those 80s as a revolution and really signing on, saying, this is, I'm in for life. It was really simple. But I think that this resurgence is based on their interest in the old days, but the validity is based on those social and political themes that are happening right now.
Right. They're not faking it. They're living through that, and so they're writing from the heart. They're not trying to come out and say, we're going to sound just like Overkill did.
It's not a fake out. No, it's the real deal. And I think because of that, then you start seeing stronger releases from bands like ourselves. I mean, starting with the formation of Damnation from Testament, all the way up to Endgame, and I think even including Ironbound, that the old guard said, wait a second, this is the way it's done. This is what we do. But I think that the young bands are really directly responsible for this, and some of them are just fantastic. And, even on this upcoming tour, we're taking Warbringer again with us.
Oh, I love those guys.
Right. We had Gamma Bomb overseas with us on a tour. Just took a Greek band called Suicidal Angels. I mean, and these are kind of that new thrash guard, and that's it's kind of cool to have that competition of the old and the new, because, my opinion is, I said, you can kiss my ass for 5 minutes, but I plan on burying you on that stage.
Right. I want to talk a little bit more about bands like Warbringer, but first I wanted to go back to the early '80s when bands like Overkill and Megadeth, even Anthrax were coming out, Metallica for that matter. You guys really, in a way, invented a sound that didn't exist prior to that point, which and again we'll talk about the younger bands who didn't really invent anything new. They're kind of, carrying the torch that you guys started. Can you talk about how that happened and in your opinion, the sounds and the bands that you were listening to and the direction that you pushed it in, and how it all kind of thrash metal and just the new sound of metal that hit in the early 80s, how that all kind of came about?
I think it, by chance, first and foremost. It was obviously a voice in the dark and who could scream the loudest at one particular time as we were developing. But it really was the harnessing of chaos, where everything prior to that was planned. The only thing that was really chaotic before that was punk rock. And we were huge punk rock fans. I mean, if you lived in New York or lived in New Jersey, you considered the Ramones yours. You just lent them out to other people when they went out on the road and toured. But you could go down to St. Mark's Place and you could see Johnny and Dee Dee Ramone having a beer in a bag, leaning on Trash and Vaudeville on the on 3rd and St. Mark's, and it was awesome. It was a fantastic feeling, and we pogoed at CB's. We saw shows. The Dead Boys at the Ritz. We saw the Dead Boys in smaller places. This was the chaos that we added to what the metal was. We loved the new wave of British heavy metal, Tank and Angel Witch and Venom. And even the early Iron Maiden stuff was considered within that realm.
Sure.
But I think with Overkill, what we did with regard to creating a sound, and I can't talk about other bands because there's signature sounds from the Bay Area, which are likened to the Bay Area. You can pick that out. But in New York, we took that new wave of British heavy metal and just forced the punk into it. And I think that gave us the X factor of originality to some degree. I mean, I think Anthrax did it to some degree also. They did it more so, I think, with hardcore than we did, and as we did more so with punk. But I think that was the creation of the sound. But the reality is that these were two genres we liked. So when Overkill was a cover band, I mean, we would open up with the Dead Boys' Sonic Reducer into Ace of Spades by Motorhead into Murders in the Rue Morgue. So, I mean, you're really talking about three totally different separate entities.
Yeah.
And that's how the sound created for us, was understanding that there was more than just one thing.
Yeah.
But also being that voice in the dark and harnessing that chaos, because there's so much power in that chaos.
It's definitely insightful. And when you look at bands like Warbringer, who you've already mentioned that you like, and I like them too, but I have heard criticism thrown at them that, okay, when bands like Overkill and Metallica and Megadeth and Anthrax were doing their thing, they invented this sound. They moved different genres of music into a new place, whereas Warbringer don't do that. They are pretty much textbook as to what you guys, Overkill, Exodus, were doing, 20, 25 years ago. As one of the people who were involved in pinpointing this sound, how do you feel about a band that is not really taking the sound in a new direction and is more just flying the flag?
No, of course not. I think it's great that these guys have this type of inspiration. And obviously I hear riffs that I've heard before from other bands, from Testament and Exodus and Death Angel, for instance, in some of this new thrash material that's out, this new wave. But, the cool thing about it is that we also took stuff from other people. I mean, we can't just say that we were struck by lightning and the sound appeared and we were blessed like so. I think what happens is that, and in the origin and at the beginning, that happens is borrowing and celebrating influence and walking down a path that has already been cut through the jungle or the woods. Eventually, you have to get off that path. And bands that last get off that path and find out what their own stamp is and how they put that stamp on their music by changing their influence, by using it as motivation, but changing it to making it their own. And I see this obviously will happen with some of these bands. I mean, the ones that last will eventually take this original path, say, to hell with following the road that's traveled. Let's sharpen up the machetes and get into the woods and create our own path. And that's where originality happens, and that's where a uniqueness happens, and that's where value happens. And I think that the bands you mentioned from the 80s, all did that at one point.
Definitely.
Had to have.
Without
I mean,
question.
when you listen to the Metallica Garage Day stuff, you know what their influences are.
Yeah.
But obviously, they used a lot of that, but went in and redefined what heavy metal was for that era and that generation.
A good friend of ours is your drummer, Ron Lipnicki. Just wanted to mention him, and I know he's been with you a number of years at this point. I think this is his second record with you guys. Where did you originally find out about Ron, and how did he come into the fold for you?
We had a problem with Tim Mallory. Well, it was actually Tim had a problem. It was a family issue that he had to handle, and had missed some festivals and missed some shows. And we sat down and talked with Tim, and we said, listen, we're going to get a guy. Not necessarily to take your place, but to not miss these other festivals and shows, because it's going to kill the momentum of the band if you can't do it. And I was doing a project called The Cursed with Dan Lorenzo, or getting ready to do it. And Dan is more than just a local guitar hero. He's been in nonfiction in Hades and released some great records, and the nonfiction records obviously being something so far ahead of their time.
Yeah.
I just saw one of their reunions. I actually saw you guys there.
Yeah.
And it was, it was funny. I was talking with someone, I think it was his wife, Gina, and I said, isn't it funny how in 93 when this came out, it was so far ahead of its time, but in 2009 it's retro.
Yeah.
But it's, Dan and I worked on that project, and when I had the drum problem, he immediately suggested Ron as the perfect fill-in. So no one else was auditioned. It was just supposed to be a fill-in when Tim didn't do it. And Tim, I think, became comfortable enough to say, they got somebody, I can go.
Yeah.
And he just left. We offered it to Ron. And, he really is instrumental to what Ironbound is.
He sounds great on the record.
He's an incredible drummer. I mean, you don't break a wild horse. I mean, it's that simple. And if... you have to understand it's the drummer. Metal records are about the drummer. Everyone else, hang on. That's really what it has to be, and it has to be a great relationship between those drum sounds and the guitar sounds. But when Ron came in off the road and was ready to do this stuff, he gives Ironbound, in my opinion, that X factor of the road coming in that takes the whole thing over the top, because the rest of us have to raise to that level. You can't lag behind. You can't say, listen, man, the tracks are too good. You got to redo them.
Right.
Can you bring them down a notch, And it was, to me, truly inspiring to see him actually come of age, especially with regard to Overkill. He'd come of age as a drummer prior.
Right.
But with regard to Overkill, he'd come of age with this record, and he knows that he's steering the ship, and the rest of us are mere passengers on this.
Yeah.
So.
Well, thank you so much, Bobby, for joining us. We want you to download Ironbound or buy the CD. It is available at Best Buy. I think that's where John and I both bought it.
Yes.
It is on iTunes.
Hey, what do you say, Bobby Blitz from Overkill? Yes, you're watching Talking Metal Pirate Radio.